My name is Aaron Wallace. I am a product manager with Pitney Bowes. I know that on the agenda it just had my face there. Not to disappoint anybody, but it's not going to be just me today. I've also got my colleague Andrew Chumney with me here. He is our single view solutions manager, so I wanted to bring Andrew in just to give us all some perspective. He's really kind of a guy that's out on the front lines, a lot of what we're doing, talking to a lot of clients, and really will bring a really good perspective about kind of some real world aspects of how we're deploying this, how we're using it. So here is the agenda we intend to follow. We're going to give a brief overview of GDPR. So we're going to talk mostly about single view of customer and how that applies to GDPR, which is a newish regulation over in Europe that's creating a lot of stress for many organizations, I think, in terms of how they're going to come into compliance. We're going to talk about how single view of customer applies to that. And then we're going to talk about how enterprise metadata is really a foundational element to single customer view. So we really feel like GDPR in many ways is a enterprise metadata problem. If you think about, and we'll talk about what GDPR is exactly here in a second, but the root of it is you have to know where all your customer information resides within your enterprise. And that's a very difficult thing for many organizations to get a handle on. So we're going to talk about that. And then Andrew's going to wrap it up. So I'm going to hand it over to Andrew right now for the GDPR introduction and overview. And then he'll hand it back to me for the single view metadata discussions. And then he'll do a brief wrap up towards the end, see if we have any time for questions as we wrap up. So Andrew, you want to go ahead? Do you want the clicker?
Yes, sir. So good morning, everyone. How are you? So we'll start off with a couple of quick questions. How many people know what GDPR is? All right, good. So the larger question, how many people know who Pitney Bowes is? Wow, all right, kind of, all right. So for those of you that don't know, Pitney Bowes is actually one of the top 100 software companies in the industry. We were actually one of Neo4j's first graph partner. Most people know us from geospatial address recognition, mailing and shipping logistics solutions. But we've gotten into master data management and enterprise-wide software solutions for outside of this traditional logistics space for about the last 10 years. So what we're really talking about today, again, is GDPR. This is kind of a funny rendition of how we thought we would represent it. GDPR basically is a European regulation that allows for a data citizen, anyone on the planet, to come approach you as a company and say, I want to know everything that you know about me. Okay? So those of you that didn't know about GDPR, you're now scared. You should be. And this is not a just European-only thing. So if you're sitting here thinking, hey, my company's not based in Europe, I don't have any European operations, this doesn't apply to me, that may or may not be true. If you do any transactions that have a European destination, you are now subject to GDPR. The precursor to GDPR was a regulation that Google was actually fined for, and Google was fined for $20 billion. That's with a B. And that $20 billion payment, just to put that in retrospect, there are 170 countries that are on the face of the planet. That's more than the gross domestic product of 17 of those countries that one fine resulted in. So what does it look like? Well, another scary thought. May 25th is when GDPR goes into effect. And what it allows a company to do, or what it allows the European Union to do, is fine you 4% of your revenue, or $20 million per instance that they find that you have violated GDPR. Okay? So the other aspect about this that you need to start thinking about is, why would my organization be subject to this? Again, if you know anything about a data citizen, you are now subject to GDPR if they reside or show that they are domiciled in the European Union. If the transaction occurred in the European Union, or if the citizen that conducted the transaction is a European Union, you are now subject to GDPR, in essence. So what does that look like? So these are basically the high notes of what GDPR covers. And so in effect, it is the data accuracy. Are you representing me properly? Do you actually know who I am, and have you recorded my data set as accurately as you can? The right to access the data. Again, anybody can come and knock on your door and say, hey, I need to know everything you know about me. The right for rectification and the right to erasure, that's probably the most scary. So if someone comes to you and says, hey, I know you know something about me, I don't want to be in your systems anywhere, anyhow, I want to be deleted. The right to be deleted is probably the biggest and most scary part of GDPR, in my opinion, because think about the referential integrity issues that you just created by deleting a person. Think about in your own organizations right now how many times Andrew Chumney potentially is splattered across your entire enterprise. I'm in your data warehouses, I'm in your transactional systems, I'm in your secondary systems, I'm in logs, I'm in all kinds of non-traditional database sources as well, right? And so if these fines apply to me that I can sue you for $4 million per instance that I find my name in your organization, that gets really expensive really quickly. Then you have the other things which are, in effect, there are many people who interpret GDPR as I have to go get authority from my data citizens to actually stand up another data store itself. I think that's a bit of an interpretation of the law, but you're free to read it as you will. But most organizations now that I'm dealing with in Europe are stopping standing up any additional data stores because they are so concerned about how they're going to manage this, how they're going to deal with this, and how they're going to resolve this. And so now they're just putting the brakes on any new data persistence capabilities or any new data stores that they're actually putting into their enterprise because of this particular regulation that's taking effect. And so with that is the addressing the challenges of GDPR and how you'd actually go about it. And so with that, I'll turn that back over to Aaron, and he'll walk you through how we would solve that with a Pitney Bowes solution.
All right. Thanks a lot, Andrew. Just a couple of other maybe statistics related to this, related to GDPR specifically. A recent study by Forrester found, this was about 6 months back, but found that 50% of organizations were not even aware of GDPR at all, which is a pretty staggering statistic. Recent compliance research has looked at specifically how companies that are leveraging cloud services, how close they are to compliance, and has found that up to 75% of those companies have not achieved the basic level of compliance with GDPR as it relates to the cloud services that they employ in their enterprise, which, as we all know, cloud is just increasingly becoming more and more part of an enterprise information fabric, enterprise information architecture. So, and I think the statistic from that was that up to most organizations employ roughly 1,000 cloud services throughout their enterprise. So, a pretty big deal if you think that 3/4 of those are not in compliance. So, some of the additional challenges to give a little more context to what Andrew was discussing there. So. If we think about the steps, and these are high-level steps, I'm going to get into some more kind of lower-level aspects of this shortly. High level, what you got to do is you got to discover, if you think about what Andrew said, a customer comes to you and says, I want you to tell me everything that you know about me. Well, in an organization of any size, you're probably talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of data sources that contain customer information and PII information. So the first step that you got to do, that we're going to primarily focus on today, is create a map of your enterprise and understand where this information lives, right? And that's where single customer view comes into play, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So you discover it, you prepare in the sense that you tag or identify those data elements, classify those data elements that contain that PII across your different systems, and then eventually you have to act on it, right? Whether it's setting up processes that enable you to find that information quickly and easily when a customer contacts you about wanting to be removed from all your systems, whether it's just a basic step of resolving entities across different databases, right? That's a huge problem in almost every organization of any size. I'm sure everybody here has experience with the problem of duplication that exists in customer data, right? I've told this story probably several Graph Connects in a row, so a few of you may have heard it. But for example, I have a credit card that I've had since I was in college, 25 plus years ago, and I still get pieces of mail every week that have my name represented properly and 5 other ones that have it completely backwards, merged. My wife has a hyphenated last name. Sometimes they'll put that as the first name, and it's really staggering at a data quality level how much these organizations still struggle. So it's a big deal to get it fixed, especially in the context of what we're talking about with GDPR. So if you think about some of these forces that are acting on every enterprise today, right? If we think about cloud and its prevalence, elastic computing, the desire for companies to move more from a CapEx model to an OpEx model, right? The need for rapid prototyping and innovation and collaborative environments that cloud can enable. Big data, we all probably sick about hearing about the 4 Vs, but it's just both a problem and an opportunity that continues to increase in relevance. So as we talk about folks bringing on IoT or smart devices, it becomes more and more all the data that those devices are generating about our customers, very, very relevant. If you think about telematics as one example in the automotive industry. So it's something that it makes it easier in a sense to understand your customers, but also creates a lot of challenges if you think about it in the context of GDPR of where that information resides, right? So mobile, is another aspect of it. Life in the app economy. If you can't swipe something these days, most people wonder, what the heck's the point of even offering me this? Analytics, data science has been a trendy thing for a while now, but I think a lot of organizations are just starting to get a handle on that role and how that role can help their overall organization. So all of these things really come together to present an opportunity for enabling agility within the organization. And most of you are probably wondering, what does any of this have to do with Graph? So we're getting to that now, right? Graph is great for agility, and it's also great for modeling a lot of the aspects of what we're talking about here, which is what I'm going to get into next. So we want to be able to provide this real-time intelligence. We need a modern data management platform for integrating data, understanding enterprise metadata, and in the context of GDPR, we need to be able to find that customer information wherever it lives and be able to quickly and easily access it and make sure that it's properly secured. So we really feel like, at its core, that GDPR is very much an enterprise metadata problem. So if you look at things like data classification, right? Another Forrester study looked at how a very large number of companies are still struggling to understand the scope of their data assets as it relates to customers, and the adoption of data classification solutions is really on the rise. This is another Forrester study that was done recently. So up to, I think it was about 50% are already there, 15% working towards that goal. That leaves another 35% that really aren't even thinking about this yet. So pretty important to get a handle on it. So GDPR as an enterprise metadata problem really, comes from the point of understanding your business, being able to find, if we tie this to single view, right? If you think about a GDPR as a single view of customer problem, I need to know everywhere that customer data lives. How do we get to that? Well, one of the first steps, again, is to understand where it lives, find those relevant sources of data, find the trusted sources of data, allow people to discover and profile new data sources and existing data sources in the context of GDPR, to be able to evaluate the impact of system changes and to enable traceability. If we're looking at reports, how do I trace that customer information back to all the systems that it came from? So we feel like there's a pretty defined best practice around building up single customer view. So it begins with modeling your customer data. It then goes into discovering where that customer data lives, mapping your high-level graph models to those existing data sources, mastering what data is appropriate, and then virtualizing some of it, right? So we really look at it, this, master data management is something that's been around for a long time. Our view has evolved more towards what's traditionally referred to as a registry pattern for MDM, so not necessarily mastering all of your customer data, because that's a lot of data, right? Being able to create those kind of virtual pointers out to other systems that enable you to access that data in real time and not have to worry about the mechanics of continually running batch jobs to master and resolve these things. So this is kind of the best practice that I'll walk us through now. Okay, so beginning with modeling your customer data and your metadata as a graph. So it's important to understand those connections between your customer data and the various elements of it, right? So how are customers connected to one another? how are they connected to organizations that you may work with? How are they connected to various aspects inside of the metadata environment, right? So again, this is that lineage and traceability aspect. So it's not just enough to understand how the actual data records are connected to one another, but at the metadata landscape, understanding how the elements of that are connected as well. So, you know, you guys work in these environments, right? There's a million things. There's reports, there's databases, there's users, there's dashboards, there's various transformations and processes that are run on your data. That's a very wide and broad landscape. So understanding that is a challenge. And what is it? It's a very densely connected network, right? And we all probably key on those words now at this point after hearing Emil's keynote, if you haven't been here before. Graph is absolutely perfect for modeling and understanding this. So we feel like it's critically important when you undertake these projects to really start with the business's view of how they want to address these problems, right? What we see a lot with traditional MDM solutions is this issue where a lot of the purchasing and evaluation of tools is done from an IT perspective, and then the business is not engaged enough up front. So you see a lot of these projects where people wind up a year and a half, 2 years down the road and kind of forced into this waterfall mode where they get to the end and they deliver maybe a dashboard or whatever it is as the final result. And the business users look at them and say, this is not at all what we needed. This is not going to help us. So graph is great in that sense in that it enables that agility, right? The schemaless nature of the graph allows you to quickly iterate and address a lot of those, to add to your model, to enhance your model, to bring in new aspects to that model, to really drive a lot of this as well. So once we've built that model, we've got to go out and understand where we access the data from, right? So you got to go out and discover and profile those key data assets. Proper data discovery typically involves classifying these assets, and again, the key thing in the context of GDPR is customer information and PII. You're talking about typically millions to billions of relevant data records that are out there across the enterprise landscape. We have to document this metadata, understand what entities and what relationships from the graph perspective live where and in which systems. The role of the information steward or the data steward is critically important in this, right? So that's kind of from what we've seen organizationally, that's sort of the role that tends to bridge a lot of the business requirements over to the IT folks that are actually implementing it. So the model that we've defined in the prior step really defines the semantic aspects of how we do this discovery, right? So we go out there and we use perhaps semantic tagging from our model to discover and profile these data sources, tag them with that information, and then that allows us to set up more effective mapping, which is kind of the next step along the line. And that's, you know, honestly, from what we've seen, where it can get a little messy, right? I mean, there's no getting around the fact that mapping a very simple model to a very complex data environment involves a lot of different connections and relationships. Again, graph, perfect for this kind of thing. So we kind of think about this as mapping the whiteboard-friendly model out to the real world in your enterprise. Again, the models are great, but there's no getting around this sort of messy business of mapping into your existing data sources. So automation can really help with this. Automated semantic detection can really help with this. Tagging can allow you to set up some auto mapping aspects of this, right? So if I've got a model that defines a customer entity and I'm able to go out and tag certain data elements, you know, this table contains customers, this table contains relationships between customers and products, this table contains products, here are the columns that specify the various properties from my graph. All of those things are things that you can do in advance in many ways, right? If you know you're going to be working on this project, why not set somebody out today to go look at all the data assets and discover them, tag them, understand them, so that when you get to the business of creating the single view, you've got a lot of that mapping already set up and established. So that's sort of the next step. Then you have to decide, you know, once you've determined where all of this data lives, you got to get to the point of, what do I want to truly master and what do I want to maybe treat more as a registry type aspect or a pointer out to other data systems, right? So this is where you get into mastering data from all kinds of different sources. Again, in the enterprise today, you're not just talking about Oracle and SQL Server instances. You're looking at things like Mongo, Cassandra, Couchbase, enterprise systems like SAP and Salesforce. These are all very typically relevant to a single customer view and bringing that data into that kind of mastered or virtualized view of your customer data that can assist with GDPR compliance in this case, the contextual elements of this case. So you got to make those decisions. What do I need to master? And mastering can include a lot of different things, right? It can include resolving entities across different systems where maybe you don't have key identifiers that link things together. It involves a lot of times data quality, so cleaning up names, cleaning up addresses. Many times it's also very beneficial to add context to your customer information as well. So think about the importance of location today, right? As an aspect of customer information, we want to understand where folks live, where they shop, where they undertake recreational activities, that kind of thing. So adding that context many times can be part of the process of mastering data from different systems. But again, you got to draw a line because it's not appropriate or performant or scalable to just look at 1,000 data sources and say, okay, we're going to just throw all of this into the graph. I mean, it's not a big data platform, right? So graph, as great as it is, there are certain aspects of how you need to design it for maximum performance and scalability. And that's one of the things where we really feel like virtualizing the graph can be a big driver, right? So this is where we look at federating access to data that maybe we don't necessarily want to master, creating those pointers out to key data elements that are dynamically and rapidly changing, and that maybe the heavy lifting of mastering those on a time scale that makes it relevant isn't worth undertaking or is too intrusive perhaps to the enterprise, right? So we can federate that access out to the non-mastered data through these virtual interfaces. We really feel like this is a best practice for creating faster time to value. And again, I've referenced the registry pattern for MDM a few times here. It's very much equivalent to that. So it's very useful for sources that change frequently. So you think about a source like website information, what's somebody doing on your website? That's constantly being updated, right? Social media information as well. It's kind of a dynamic stream there, right? You don't want to be running a batch process every 5 minutes to bring that in. It's much better to kind of virtualize that and be able to reach out dynamically for it. So that's kind of the main steps for getting it set up as we see it, getting a single customer view set up. And then, there's obviously an iterative, ongoing aspect to this. It's not just a one and done thing. You're going to want to constantly be looking at other data sources, new data sources you're bringing online. And also, in the context of GDPR, lineage is very important, right? So being able to trace back that information that I'm looking at on a screen or in a printed report or whatever it is, being able to trace that back to its source is really a fundamental part of what GDPR compliance means. So impact analysis, kind of the flip side of that, being able to look at a data source. If I've got a relational database and I want to change a column name, we all know in a big enterprise, that's something that takes a lot of red tape to get done, right? And being able to understand, okay, the impact of me changing this column name now stretches out to these processes, which write data to these other systems, and now I can figure out, okay, here are the folks that I need to notify about this change, and maybe get a little more streamlined in that process. So again, it's kind of the ongoing governance of building a single view. You've always got to be looking at what's the next step, how do we evolve it, and really looking at ongoing aspects of both lineage and impact analysis across the enterprise. So, kind of circling back to how graph is relevant here, and hopefully I've kept that front of mind with everybody as we've talked about this. We've been partnered with Neo4j for 7 years now, I believe it is. We went with Neo4j as the underpinning for what was initially an MDM product that has evolved to more of a single view of customer product. And the reason we did that was because of many of the things I've mentioned here. It's really great at understanding connections between data and being able to efficiently query those connections. And the modeling exercise is something that we find is great at addressing that problem that I talked about before, of bridging that gap between business and IT that everybody talks about. It's very agile. You don't have to define everything up front. You can evolve a lot of your data structures as you go along, allowing you to connect that data across your multiple existing systems, sources, and platforms. And as we saw in one of the demos there in the keynote, it's also pretty handy for setting up natural language type queries in front of it, right? So if you build a basic natural language structure around your model elements and relationships, we've got some capabilities that allow you to kind of reach into that. If you know the basic context of your metadata model at a high level, it's quite easy to get access to that information and explore it. So that's kind of that search engine simplicity that we reference there. So again, we feel like graph is really the key piece of this transformative approach. And if you look at the industry, if any of you all track information management vendors or MDM vendors, you'll see that this is a trend. I mean, Forrester notes it, Gartner notes it. A lot of these vendors, if you look at them, they're starting to tell very graphy kinds of stories. And I think it's something that's catching on. We feel like we were kind of out in front of it, but it's great to see the adoption coming across a number of different industries. So this, getting back to single customer view, it adds a lot of benefits across your operational environment in terms of information lifecycle. So that enrichment aspect, and we talked about GDPR as a primary use case here, but single view has a lot of other use cases. So you could be looking to improve customer experience. We all know and see that the main way that a lot of organizations differentiate themselves from competitors these days is through customer experience. We can all think of examples with mobile cellular companies, cable companies, airlines, banks, and financial services companies where we've had experiences that were not so great, and we've had others where we're like, I'm going to keep coming back for business here, right? So customer experience is another very important use case for single customer view. Allowing us to validate information at the point of data capture. That's more about setting up real-time services as it relates to data quality. Expedite onboarding of customers. Inform your risk assessment. So that's really where this is kind of one of the use cases that ties back to GDPR. Finding the data and also understanding its risk profile. How relevant is this to the regulation? Increasing automation, always important, and really just gaining better control of your data assets, right? There's this kind of theme that's been in the data industry for a long time that most companies are learning now to treat your data as an actual asset, right? And not just as an element of your IT infrastructure. It's a critically important aspect of how most organizations do business these days. So other single platform capabilities, and this is just a little bit of a pitch for some of the things that Pitney can provide. We won't spend much time on this. You guys please do come by our little table over here, and we'll be happy to show and talk about this more in depth, but these are some of the other capabilities we can provide, whether it's data connectors, data quality I've talked about quite a bit, different types of service enablers, enrichment capabilities, and then some of the governance aspects I mentioned as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Andrew to wrap things up for us, and take it away, Andrew.
So on the screen here you have a kind of a representation of how graph works across a typical insurance organization, right? And so in an insurance organization, what you want to understand is, obviously the customer. But a customer in a GDPR perspective may not be necessarily the primary record you're looking for, because a customer may be involved in a transaction that may be associated with that customer. So a customer's out at the website, they go ahead and put in a claim. And when they put in that claim, they're going to add, who were the other claimants that were a part of this accident? Well, what if this accident was over in Europe? You've just now attached yourself over to a claim in a GDPR. Now you're subject to it, and that's now in your claim system. And your commercial policies and your commercial auto, all the other associated things with it, are some things that, again, may have different record sets that may have some kind of connotation to that may be regulated with GDPR. But more importantly, to talk about Spectrum and its overall application, what we do with it is we use Spectrum as a platform to do just this, right? To tie systems together, to tie data together. Aaron just went through kind of some of the tool sets that we have that allow us to actually, come in and land in your organizations, to jack into your systems, to put a graph entity around it, and to be able to manage that system with very robust and mature master data management tools for data replication and for data consistency and quality. As well as the analytics capability of being able to understand those things, be able to report off the analytics that you come off of the graph. And then finally, the thing that Aaron didn't mention is the entire stack is built on a complete SOA architecture. So it allows us to actually use services to not only capture the data, but to actually replicate this data and push this data out into other systems to be reused. Typically what we find is, in this particular example I just showed you, in a claimant system, we don't necessarily want to understand all those things about the policies and all the fleets and everything else that's associated with that particular customer. So that claimant system now is using an API call out to our graph solution to actually understand those aspects of that transaction to make the customer experience much better, and that we don't have to extend those systems and their data assets to understand how those policies and how those fleets are actually used by that claimant system, for example. So one of the things about Spectrum is it allows to land into an organization, expand that capability, and to not be a solution unto itself, but to add and enhance the other solutions that are already in your environment. So it's not a rip and replace, it's an enhance. And so as we started the conversation, we'll kind of finish with some revisits of the trivia. This is just some aspects about Pitney Bowes specifically. Our industry base is very large. I've personally identified 27 different architectural patterns that the Spectrum solution actually addresses. And it goes everything from fraud detection to address validation, MDM, GDPR, risk assessment and insurance, and manufacturing. And it's the same application. It's the same installation. All we're doing is licensing it slightly differently for the actual needs of our customers, because we can be very prescriptive with how we license it. Some customers leverage Graph, some just use traditional data sources and big data. So it really depends on your application. The primary point is that Spectrum is a complete solution set around Neo4j as a graph database. You can go out and buy a database today, a Mongo, an Oracle, or whatever your case may be, but you can't really do a whole lot with that database itself. You need to have the tool set, the framework, the support of a large organization to come in and help you get velocity and implement that solution and your vision that you have for your organization. That's really what Spectrum and Pitney Bowes is all about. So we have about 8 minutes left. I decided I'd go ahead and open it up for questions. I know it's we've got a lot of ambient noise here, so I'll try to repeat the questions as I can, and we'll kind of go from there. So we'll kind of start up front, and we have a mic in the back. So. It's a very fair question. The question was, what's our client base, and are they stampeding towards us, or are they not kind of understanding what we are? Probably the largest, and I'm a solutions manager. Probably my largest job is education. I spend a vast majority of my time educating our clients on what Graph is and how to use it, how it applies to specific business cases, and how it doesn't. I have the advantage, and the reason I came to Pitney Bowes, I've been here about 5 months now. I came to Pitney Bowes because Pitney Bowes is in 90% of the Fortune 500 today as we stand here. Spectrum as a software solution is in 12,000 implementations across the planet. But usually it's not leveraged in the context that we are here about. Usually it's leveraged in the context of our geospatial. We're the second largest geospatial company on the planet, and mostly address matching and logistics. And so we're coming in and we're showing an additive solution to what you already know is a technology and how to implement it better, faster. So does that address your question? Okay. Okay, and question? Yeah.
Two more questions.
Yeah.
So thank you for the nice graphic story.
Thank you.
One question. So in terms of the architecture, do you guys publish any of your architecture on GitHub? Is there a Git repository or checks about this one?
Uh-huh.
Another question is, you had a slide for visualization. Are you guys just putting Neo into the document and then over to Graph, or are there some other interesting details around that?
Great. I'll handle the two, and I'll let you handle the third.
Yep.
So the first one was, hey, we're doing really cool technology. Thank you. The second one was, do we publish anything in a GitHub or an open source? And the answer is no. We are an enterprise-driven company. I'm wearing a suit. Protect your wallet. We're here to make money. But because we are a very large enterprise application, you use Pitney Bowes probably every day in your life. You just don't even know it. We're kind of like the BASF. We don't make software, we make software better. So if you use Salesforce.com, you use our matching engine. If you use eBay, you use us. If you use all these different applications, you're using our technology, you just don't know it. And so finally, the secondary question, did you hear it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess Mike's back up now. I just, to address the GitHub question as well, real quick, that is something that we are, not GitHub specifically, but we are looking at ways to make the software, which as Andrew points out is a proprietary stack currently, very open in terms of integration, but no open source or any of that sort of thing. We're looking at ways to kind of make it more open. I mean, we're not there yet, but coming to conferences like this is great for that, because I hate having to tell people, to go to the website to access it, as opposed to being able to kind of give them a little more direct path to doing some of the really neat things we can do. As it relates to data virtualization, we use an open source product called TID. TID, yeah, it's now owned by Red Hat, I believe. That's underneath the covers that provides. So we basically connect Neo4j up to TID. TID provides the federated interface to the external data sources, relational, Mongo, Salesforce, whatever it is. And then we integrate that into the graph and create this sort of virtual node, virtual relationship concept that reaches out through that.
We'll jump over here for a second. Yeah.
This is a traditional metadata lineage kind of problem. It's always easy if everything has the same name, but what do you guys do in your space to mitigate that? Do you discover technical environments, that
Yes.
kind of thing? That's where I'm.
Yeah, exactly. So we do discovery both at the data level and the metadata level. We enable concepts like automatic semantic detection. So there's sort of built-in pieces that can go out and look for things that are commonly found in terms of name fields or customer tables, things like that. So looking at patterns of names in databases to kind of automatically identify those things. And that's configurable as well. So you can create your own patterns to kind of go out and do that semantic detection. And the tagging aspect that I mentioned as well. So doing a lot of that work up front with your data management types and getting into those databases out front of the discovery exercise. If you can set it up on that side, that makes the mapping a lot easier to identify and identify where that semantic information lives.
And to extend on that point slightly, in a lot of the implementations that we do, Spectrum was very early on at basically abstracting from the Neo4j database itself. So we have a lot of iconology and a lot of metadata and a lot of ability to change the data structure on the fly without having to drop and recreate databases. So it gives us a lot more flexibility and a lot more velocity in our implementations as to discovering that metadata, leveraging that metadata, and making that metadata more contextual for the actual user community. So those are two things that Aaron and the team have done. Again, because we were such an early on partner, we didn't enjoy the things you saw today of, hey, this is really getting mature now. I mean, these guys were in it in the very beginning. So we have our own kind of pathway we chose in some correlation. So, yes.
You mentioned that there's top 25 insurer in the world are your customers. Can you just, to the extent you can, give us a few examples of the business problem that you help them solve?
Very good. In most of our insurance companies, we are, I have to do the introduction, hi, my name's Andrew Chumley at Pitney Bowes, and the CIO tells me, hey, the mailroom's down the hall. I'm like, no, hang on, I'm really not lost. I'm here to talk to you about something else. So most of our stuff in the insurance companies is very mailroom related, very geospatial, very risk assessment, kind of back office processes. So we're now moving into the front office, having dialogues with CIOs saying, hey, this is how we can impact your overall organization. We're not just a point solution to help you with logistics, address matching, and risk assessment. Now we're actually moving into the space of becoming a core player in their enterprise architectural software patterns to help bridge multiple systems together, to help with mitigation and elimination of manual process and sidebar processes that we help solve. Some of our manufacturing partners are here as well, and even within those contexts, what we're doing is we're understanding that organizations have X number of silos, that data of application and data silos that are built across the organization. And these are point solutions that do processes, particular point processes very, very well. But what Pitney Bowes has the ability to do is come in and lay in underneath those and give you a very broad understanding of an entire aspect. So, for example, if I wanted to know everything about Andrew Chumley for a very large insurance manufacturer, that may constitute 25, 30 different systems, right? I've got my actual policy system, my claims systems, any other metadata I have associated with it, data warehouses, personalization, householding, all of those systems, we now bridge together to give a true single view of Andrew Chumley and everything we can possibly know about Andrew Chumley, not just, hey, is Andrew Chumley in a household and my contact information, which most MDM solutions, that's what their purview is, right? It's just everything, single view to them is, what do I know about Andrew Chumley in contact? Not everything I know about Andrew Chumley across my enterprise. And so that's the distinction that we are. So it's just, traditionally called multi-domain. I don't care for the term because I don't think it fully articulates what I just described, right? Yeah. Okay. We're out of time, but I appreciate everything. If you have any questions, you can come up and see us afterwards. But I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.